My Best Friends Live in the Woods. The Adventures of Albert by Anne Michelle Mracek. Chapter 45. A Kerfuffle of a Tizzy. The next morning, Mother Skunk woke up hearing water pouring in the kitchen. She sleepily turned her head to see Mrs. Rabbit filling the water vase with the water ladle. She smiled, seeing her friend fussing over the gift. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to wake you, Mrs. Rabbit said as she carefully removed a wilted bloom and did a little rearranging. You're up early, Mother Skunk smiled at her. Well, I didn't want them to dry out, and I want to get to the garden early this morning, Mrs. Rabbit explained. Mother Skunk nodded. It was obvious that the flowers had made quite an impression. Actually, I think I'll head there now, Mrs. Rabbit said, her nose twitching. Could you send Gabby and George over when they wake up? Of course, Mother Skunk nodded. As Mrs. Rabbit hopped out the front door, Mother Skunk couldn't help but giggle. I hope she sees him soon. She laughed to herself and closed her eyes to try to get a few more minutes of sleep. Mrs. Rabbit was in a kerfluffle of a tizzy of emotions. There's just no other way to put it. She would hop as fast as she could, then suddenly change her mind and stop and hop back. Eventually, her desire to see if anyone was waiting for her at the house won, and she finally made it to her front door. The shock of what she saw made her dizzy, and she had to sit down. The door had a fresh coat of bright yellow paint and a lovely wreath of dried baby sunflowers and grapevine hung in the center. It was more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. As she looked around to see if anyone was there, she noticed a robin pecking for worms. Do you know who decorated my front door? She asked the robin. The bird glanced up at her just long enough to say, nope, and then dove in for a worm. Mrs. Rabbit was still sitting staring at her beautiful door, ears wiggling back and forth, when Gabby and George and Larissa scampered up. George was the first to notice the yellow door and came bounding up. Wow, this is great, he said, and dashed up to take a closer look. As he inspected the wreath, he noticed a tiny piece of paper tucked into the twists of the grapevine. Hey, Mom, did you read the note? He yelled over to her. Note, she said and jumped up. She ran up and George pointed to the tiny fold of paper. Mrs. Rabbit held her breath as she opened it. Drawn inside were two things, a heart and the initials F.R. Who's F.R.? George asked, looking over his mother's shoulder at the note. Mrs. Rabbit shook her head. Gabby and Larissa had joined them, and Mrs. Rabbit held the note up for the girls to see. Frog starts with F, Gabby teased. Mother was not amused. Did you go inside? Larissa asked. Oh, no, I didn't think about it. Mrs. Rabbit shook her head. Well, perhaps you should, Larissa encouraged her. As Mrs. Rabbit swung open her now yellow door, she gasped in delight. The kitchen table was draped with a new white tablecloth, and another carved wooden vase with a heart on it sat in its center. There were white daisies and bright red Indian paintbrush flowers in a lovely bouquet, carefully arranged in the vase. Oh my, was all she could say. Gabby and Larissa squealed with delight. Go in, see if there's another note, Gabby said, jumping up and down with excitement. Mrs. Rabbit hopped to the vase to see another tiny note folded neatly on the table next to the vase. The children were right behind her and were all asking excitedly, what does it say? Inside was drawn another heart, but much bigger this time, and inside the heart were the initials FR plus MR. "It's a love note!" Larissa exclaimed. "MR is Mrs. Rabbit," she declared, pleased with herself. Mrs. Rabbit slowly looked around the house. She hadn't really been back, except to clean, in weeks. As her gaze landed here and there, she began to see other little pieces of folded paper. It's like a scavenger hunt," she laughed. She hopped to the next note, tucked inside her empty teacup. This one was completely different. It said, "You are beautiful." Mrs. Rabbit's ears began to wiggle, and this one she quickly closed and stuffed in her apron pocket. The girls looked at each other and giggled. "That one must have been a doozy," Gabby whispered to Larissa. Why don't you young ones go tend to the garden?" Mrs. Rabbit said, her eyes still searching the room. The three children stepped outside, giggling. There were 7 notes in all, carefully placed around the room. They all had a compliment. "You are sweet. You make me smile. You are a great gardener," and so on. Each one she carefully refolded and placed into her apron pocket for safekeeping. After she could find no more notes, she sat at her kitchen table in deep thought. A knock at the door made her look up as the 3 children scampered in. "We have a couple more tomatoes, a zucchini, and more eggplant," they reported. Mrs. Rabbit nodded and stood to go. Before she walked out, she left a note of her own. The next morning, Mrs. Rabbit woke as the first light began to glow in the sky. She tiptoed out of the back room of the cave, being careful not to wake Gabby and George, made her way past Mother Skunk's asleep in her chair, and as quietly as she could, went out the front door. It was very difficult to keep those big back feet quiet, and she sighed with relief as she closed the door behind her. The sky was overcast, and a lovely soft yellow seemed to glow across the whole sky. As she sat and watched the sunrise, the yellow brightened. She began to see the outline of clouds. They were moving quickly, a high wind pushing them due east. They looked like swirling gray fluff on a yellow background. To the west, patches of blue sky started to peek out between the rolling clouds. Just moments later, the gray clouds began to look lavender, and a blush of peach backlit their edges. Mrs. Rabbit took a deep breath, then another. She was staring blankly at the swirling clouds above her when she heard the front door slowly open. Glancing over, she saw Albert carefully and quietly closing the door. She nodded to him and motioned for him to come and sit down next to her. Without a word, he nodded and came over. They sat in silence for a while, gazing at the beautiful sky. Albert was the first to speak. "I'm going to pick a bouquet for Clara." Mrs. Rabbit smiled. Albert continued, "I like to leave it at her front door. Then I hide and wait and watch till she wakes up and finds it. The look on her face is wonderful." Mrs. Rabbit gasped. "Oh my! Oh my!" "What'd I say?" Albert was surprised by her response. He couldn't imagine what could have upset her. I'm being watched," she said, her nose twitching nervously. Albert was confused. "How do you figure?" he asked her. "Oh, someone left me flowers and notes at the walnut tree yesterday," she explained. "I heard about that from George," Albert nodded. "Well, if you watch Clara, FR was probably watching me." "Maybe," Albert agreed. But that's a good thing. It just means he cares for you, Albert said as he stood up. I'd like to stay and visit, but I need to get a move on it if I want that bouquet on the porch before Clara wakes up, he said as he excused himself and trotted off. Mrs. Rabbit went back to watching the sky. It was a hazy blue with puffy clouds lit bright yellow. Then she had a thought. "FR," she said out loud. If you are watching, next time, instead of flowers, what I really need is a new wooden spoon." She laughed. Then she went back inside to help with breakfast. Meanwhile, Albert was picking purple cornflowers and white daisies. He was pondering over his conversation with Mrs. Rabbit. He had been surprised to see her reaction at the thought of being watched. I wonder if Clara would be upset, he thought to himself as he started toward her house, bouquet in hand. When he arrived, he laid the flowers in front of her door and tiptoed off to his hiding place to watch. He was later arriving than usual, and it wasn't long at all before Clara opened the door. She lit up with a smile as she picked up his offering, then breathed in a huge sniff of their perfume. "Good morning," Albert said out loud. Clara froze and began looking in all directions. Albert stepped out from his hiding place and walked toward her, smiling with mischief in his eyes. Clara giggled. "How long have you been sitting there?" she laughed. "Not long," Albert shrugged, which today was true. Clara carried her bouquet and sat on the fallen tree trunk near their fire pit in front. Albert followed and sat beside her. "Lovely sky," Clara sighed, then took another sniff of her flowers. "These are lovely, thank you," she smiled at Albert. "Just to make you smile," he said and leaned in, nudging her shoulder with his. "You know, you don't have to hide. I would really rather see you if you were here," Clara said, her eyes narrowing as she searched his face. Albert nodded. "The surprise is lovely, but sitting next to you is better," she smiled, reaching out to hold his hand. "Did you hear? Mrs. Rabbit has a secret admirer," Albert asked Clara. "Oh, yes, I think the whole forest knows," she giggled. "It's quite the topic," she said, eyes sparkling. "Does anyone know who FR is?" Albert asked. "I talked to Mrs. Rabbit this morning. She was the first one up." Clara nodded. "Actually, I think all the birds know. But for once, they are keeping a secret," Clara laughed. "Well, I hope he shows himself soon. Mrs. Rabbit is all a tizzy," Albert chuckled. "Oh, I hope it goes on for quite a while," Clara giggled. "The suspense is fun." Back at the cave, Bluebell and Benjamin had walked down to join the family for breakfast. "Don't get me wrong," Bluebell was saying to Benjamin as they strolled down the path toward Mother Skunk's front door. "I love our new house. It's just, I'm so used to the bustle of breakfast and everyone waking up and the morning chatter. It's just so quiet at our place," she explained. Benjamin smiled at her and patted her hand. "I know, it's fine," he nodded. As they came in the front door, Charlie was there waiting. He pounced out to hug his big sister. "Is it later?" he asked, jumping up and down. "Later?" Bluebell looked puzzled and laughed. "Oh, yes, I suppose it is later. Let's get a batch of cookies mixed up." Mrs. Rabbit had her apron on and was headed out the door. "Don't you want to stay for a cookie?" Charlie called out to her. Mrs. Rabbit's ears were wiggling. She had hoped to slip out unnoticed. "No, thank you, dear," she said and hurried out the door. This time there was no indecision. She hopped straight to her yellow front door. everything seemed as she had left it, and her heart sank. She cautiously opened the yellow front door and stepped in. Again, everything seemed as she had left it, and she felt a pang of disappointment. Then she noticed the note she had left was missing and smiled. "Might as well start the weeding," she told herself, and headed back out to the garden. Presently, Gabby, George, and Larissa showed up and pitched in. "You seem quiet," Gabby said, observing her mother. "No new notes?" she asked. Mrs. Rabbit shook her head and continued digging up a dandelion root. "Oh, we should dig a big batch of these and dry them," she said, holding up the dandelion. "They make great tea and are so good for you," she said, trying to focus on the task at hand. But as she worked, her eyes kept glancing around the forest to see if she could spot FR watching. Eventually, she sighed, stood up, rubbing her back, and put the pile of dandelions in her basket. "Enough for today. Let's head back," she said, and turned back toward the cave. She turned to glance over her shoulder and thought she saw movement near the pine tree. She froze and stared, hopeful. But then a brilliant red cardinal hopped out from behind its trunk. "A spirit bird," she said out loud, then sighed and walked back toward the cave. "I hope she finds a note tomorrow," Gabby whispered to Larissa. "I don't like to see her so sullen." That evening, Albert and Mother Skunk were seated in the kitchen, quietly talking over a cup of chamomile tea. It was like old times and felt really nice. With the flood and all the house guests, it had been quite a while since they could carve out some quiet time together. "I took Clara flowers this morning," Albert was saying. "But this time I said good morning and came over to talk with her," he explained. Mother Skunk smiled. "I'll bet she'd like that," she said, nodding her approval. As they chatted, Mrs. Rabbit peeked her head out of the back room. Mind if I join you?" she asked. Mother Skunk patted the chair next to her and waved Mrs. Rabbit over. "Tea?" Mother Skunk asked and started to get up. "Heaven, sit, I can get it." Mrs. Rabbit smiled at her host. "Mother Skunk," Mrs. Rabbit began in a serious tone. "Please, Matilda is fine," Mother interrupted. Mrs. Rabbit grinned and her nose twitched. It was an honor to be given first name privileges. "Oh, Matilda," she said and nodded her thanks. I think it's time I moved back to the walnut tree," she said. "Please understand, I have loved your company. It's not that," she said, her nose twitching nervously. Matilda nodded in understanding. "You want to be there if FR shows up," she smiled. Is it that obvious?" Mrs. Rabbit laughed. "Quite," Matilda giggled. Mrs. Rabbit poured herself a cup of tea and joined Albert and Mother Skunk at the kitchen table. "When were you thinking of moving back?" Matilda asked. "In the morning," Mrs. Rabbit said, nodding. "I'll help you pack your baskets and carry them back to your house," Albert offered. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Rabbit smiled. "Thank you for understanding, Matilda," Mrs. Rabbit said most sincerely. "You're welcome, Mrs. Rabbit," she said, kindly patting her hand. "It's Phyllis," she said quietly. "Matilda, you can call me Phyllis." And she hopped to the back room for her last night's sleep in the cave. Well, actually, she didn't sleep at all. She tossed and turned and couldn't quiet her thoughts. Between trying to remember where she had put things to pack and wondering about FR, she was awake all night. It was a huge relief when the sun finally rose and everyone else was up. The rabbits had been living in the cave for long enough that her belongings had left the baskets and were scattered everywhere. Albert was following Mrs. Rabbit with the basket as she hopped through the kitchen. She placed this and that in the basket with a nervous, "Oh my, can't forget this." "You know, if you miss anything, you can come back and get it," Albert reassured her. They made a merry little parade. Mrs. Rabbit, Gabby, George, Larissa, and Albert, each carrying a full basket, going to the walnut tree and the yellow front door. Mrs. Rabbit had made sure to take the carved wooden vase with the heart on it in her basket. She planned on uniting it with the one on her kitchen table to make a set. She was wondering if F.R. carved them himself or got them in a trade when she arrived. She noticed something different about the door wreath, but at this distance, couldn't quite tell what. Was there a stick across the wreath? She squinted to see and hurried forward. "A spoon!" she squealed with excitement. "Oh, F.R., you were watching me! Thank you!" she said out loud, fully expecting him to hear her. She sat down her heavy basket and carefully untied the ribbon, holding her new spoon to the wreath. It was a lovely redwood and finely made with a smooth finish. "Cherry wood!" she exclaimed and showed it to the children. Mrs. Rabbit took a deep breath, opened her front door, and hopped in. "Let's get moved in," she said with enthusiasm. The 5 baskets were piled high, but with 5 movers, they were quickly emptied. "Many hands make short work," Mrs. Rabbit exclaimed as she slowly turned in a circle to survey their work. She was quite pleased and all smiles. "I'm really glad to be home," George sighed. Gabby wasn't so sure. It suddenly occurred to her that she was being separated from her Lissa Blue. Her lower lip started to quiver and she held back tears. Albert noticed her distress and put an arm around her. Then Larissa joined them in a group hug. "What's wrong?" Larissa asked, quietly patting her hand. "Oh, I don't want to live away from you, Lissa Blue. I liked being at your house," she sobbed. Mrs. Rabbit hadn't thought how it would affect her children. She was so caught up in her own excitement. Her ears wiggled back and forth as she thought. "Why don't you spend the night with Larissa in the cave and the 2 of you can join me in the garden in the morning?" Mrs. Rabbit offered. Gabby wiped away a tear. "Really?" she said with a sniffle. "Really," Mrs. Rabbit added. "Speaking of garden, let's get to it," she said, and they all headed out toward the tomatoes. "I need to get those tomatoes staked up. They're getting so tall they want to flop over," Mrs. Rabbit was saying. "You mean like this?" Albert pointed. "Someone beat you to it," he laughed. Each tomato plant had a sturdy wooden stake, and they were tied neatly with twine. Then they heard a deep voice behind them. "I hope I did it right. I'm just trying to be a help to you." Mrs. Rabbit's heart skipped a beat, and she spun around to see a tall rabbit in a straw hat hopping toward them. He grinned to reveal 2 huge buck teeth. His nose was rather large, and one of his ears was bent and a bit scarred. But to Mrs. Rabbit, he looked like a prince. She held her breath, heart pounding, nose twitching. he stood right in front of her and brought a bouquet of flowers from behind his back. He held them out to her with that big, toothy grin. "Fred Rabbit at your service," he said with a little bow. Mrs. Rabbit did a little curtsy and taking the bouquet said, "Oh, very pleased to meet you." The two gazed into each other's eyes and saw their future there. Then she heard the children giggling and looked to see them huddled together, whispering and giggling. "And this must be Gabby and George," he said with a smile and a nod to them. "And I'm Albert, and this is Larissa," Albert introduced them. "Thanks for helping with the move," he smiled. As Mrs. Rabbit sniffed her bouquet, she bumped her nose on something hard. "Oh, another spoon!" She laughed with delight. "Do you like it?" Fred asked. "Oh, yes, thank you," she blushed. "Want to come in for a cup of tea?" she offered. "Yes, ma'am," he grinned and held out his hand to her. She took it and felt sparks fly.
Chapter 45, A Kerfuffle of a Tizzy. Discussion and questions. Love. Does love at first sight exist? I can tell you from my own life that it most certainly does. Young love is often like that, a sudden attraction at first sight. But as we mature, love is often a gradual, gentle process, like watching the petals of a water lily blossom slowly open to the sunshine. The mystery suitor understood the value of longing and anticipation. He wanted Phyllis to fall in love with his kind and giving spirit. His many generous gifts, each carefully planned, each useful and artistic, helped Phyllis to gradually fall in love. He gave her days of thrilling anticipation and new hope and purpose. So, by the time they actually met, she was already in love with the thought of him. He realized he was not particularly handsome, and it was important to give Phyllis a chance to see his spirit first. And truly, that is the only thing that matters in a marriage. All flowers fade. We all lose the beauty of youth. But when we love our partner's spirit, we barely notice. We see through the eyes of love. Question 1. Have you ever experienced love at first sight? Question 2. Is there someone in your life that you love for their kind spirit? Question 3. What little things can you do to surprise and please the ones you love?
I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from Chapter 1.
In a dream, in a trance,